Welcome. So I'm Bob West, CEO of Echelon One and recovering CSO, CISO, whatever you want to call it. Thanks for joining us. We are going to be talking about emerging threats from an executive perspective. And what I'd like to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves. So John, you want to start with the honors?
Sure, thanks, Bob. My name is John Stewart. I'm Chief Security Officer of Cisco Systems. That's the CISCO one, not the SYSCO one. And we're also one of the sponsors, so come visit our booth if for no other reason that we'll probably figure out some way to give you free stuff. So come wander up and say hi.
Robert.
I'm Bob Lentz. I'm the CISO for the Department of Defense.
Max.
I'm Max Kelly, Chief Security Officer at Facebook.
Hi, Dan Klinger from the Hershey Company. I lead the security effort at Hershey on a global perspective.
Dr. John.
And the same for John Deere.
Great.
John
So
Johnson.
go ahead. Anything else?
I forgot to introduce myself.
Oh, good to meet you. So, so we have, first of all, it's good to see that we can pack the audience. And so as every year, we'll do duck calls later. So, there's always a stream of emerging threats, and this week is no exception to that. So I wanted to start the conversation out in terms of we have threats that hit the press, and the executive team is going to read about it in the Wall Street Journal, see it or on CNN or .com or whatever it is, and the next conversation is going to be, okay, so John, what's our exposure, and do you like your job? Do you want to stick around? Please take care of that stuff. Are we good? What are the shareholders going to say when all this stuff ceases to rumble?
So is that why you're recovering CISOs? Because you had to answer that question and you're no longer employed by the company that you're at? Or how'd that work?
Yeah.
No, I mean, so my executives, in all candor, more often than not, will make a working assumption that all is well until told otherwise. And that if we don't have it under control, more often than not, they'll find out about it because something will be breaking that they're using, or their customers will be calling them. So that the response that I typically get is, okay, I'm assuming you got everything under control, and I'm assuming we're telling our customers what we're doing, and I'm assuming that if you need anything, you'll call. To preempt that typically would only be to say, I'm going to leave voicemail for you. Everything's okay. We're telling our customers, and I'll call you if I need anything. But that's basically how it typically would react.
Yeah. Good stuff. How about your shop, Bob?
Well, our shop, every morning at 7:30, we have a meeting, and the first person that will have the floor is the public affairs folks. So the first question is going to be, is this going to break in the Washington Post or the New York Times or whatever? So that's the first question we have to answer. And then how real is this particular item? Is it really coming from North Korea, as an example, as some press was
Has
reporting?
something to do with a recent event?
Yeah, as some recent event, indicated. And then we have our legislative affairs folks who will immediately say, well, is Congress going to get all over us? So that's that sector that we have to deal with. So you have to make sure you fully understand how plugged in the legislative branch is. And then our third set of folks are the money folks. Well, how much is this going to translate to a money issue? So you have to deal with that. And then we have the business community. So you have the medical people and the transportation people and say, well, how is this going to impact me? Then you have the war fighters. So those are the folks with the Twinkies on their shoulders who will immediately step up and want to deal with the issue. So we have a lot of different constituents that are going to take a lot of different tactics. So it's a lot of apples and oranges and tangerines that we have to deal with. Yeah. So that's sort of the situation that we have to try to look at each one of them in their own separate worlds and deal with them accordingly.
Yeah. So to me, it sounds like the apples, oranges, and tangerines aren't too dissimilar from the private sector environment in terms of, and one of the things that I see many organizations overlook is what the first thing that you mentioned, Bob, is the public communication, and says, so bad things happen, what are we going to say, and having a stock answer, whatever the situation might be, right? Because particularly for public companies, perception is reality. And if you give the wrong answer and it gets out there in the media outlets, probably not a good thing. Yeah, great. Max.
I think from our standpoint, or at least the way that I look at it, I don't like to hear about things in the press first. So we've worked really hard in our organization to build a good intelligence organization and be our own worst enemy. My group is constantly hacking the site. We have people in development who are doing that, and we try and find and identify issues long before anyone else even hears about them or knows about them. That being said, we're not going to catch everything, and now and again something will come through. And as yet, it's never been anything where we didn't at least have an inkling that such a vuln was possible, and people were generally aware of ways to fix them. But I think the best way to keep, from my standpoint, the best way to keep my job and not have the situation that we're talking about here is keeping on top of where the vulns are and having good intel.
Yeah. So I think you raised a couple of interesting things. It's there's many organizations have the perspective that says, so bad things happen and CISO goes away. And we were talking earlier about the shelf life of the average chief information or chief security officer, and having a conversation about dog years and similar thing in terms of shelf life. But if the chief security officer or the executive is doing their job, they're acting similar to a general counsel that says, so we have legal risks that are out there, right? And if I were in your shoes as an executive team, here's what I'd do. And the same thing applies in terms of security, is I'm here to coach you as an executive team and as an organization and my business partners. And if I were in your shoes, here's what I would do. But at the end of the day, with several small exceptions, this fundamentally becomes a business decision. And part of that becomes making a rational investment in security and having the right process in place to address things when things go bump in the night. Mr. Klinger.
Great. Similar to Facebook, what we don't want is, I don't want executives calling me. I don't want the CIO calling me, because he may not always have the right information. Is it truly FUD? Or do we have our arms around it? And I think having our arms around it is having credibility. So when we're proactive, we know what's going on, we have our ear to the ground, our executive team clearly understands that we have a consistent approach. We know things are going to happen. They happen continuously. We may not always have the right type of approach, but we certainly are committed. We have the right type of people approaching the problem. But certainly we have to understand the impact. Anytime there's a situation that arises, clearly you want to be aggressive on it, have the right people aligned to it, and report to the CIO and report to the executive team. Because I know if I don't go after him, he'll come after me. And he's going to want some answers. So again, for us, it's having a consistent approach and having that ongoing credibility.
John.
Yeah, I think those are all good, excellent points. And we don't have a CISO at our company, so maybe that's why I've been there for 10 years. More of a moving target. Who do we fire? I think if we're dealing with a threat in a space where we have more maturity and more experience, then we're going to have more of a strategic approach to dealing with it. We'll have a better developed plan. If it's something that's new, some of these emerging threats, then typically we like to get out in front of it. We like to have put thought into it. What if in advance. If not, we tend to be more reactive. I mean, that's natural. And we make the best use of our response framework that we have in place. I think it comes down to having good processes and excellent communication. Communication just can't be overemphasized, I think. Keeping management informed with what they need to know, involving the right teams, involving your help desk. So, I think that's sort of the approach that we take.
Yeah.
So you were asking a slightly different question also, Bob, which is what do we have to do in communications? And I think you mentioned it as well, Bob. Translation half the time is what I have to do for communications.
Yeah.
So what does MSATL mean to Cisco Systems? Well, if my chief counsel asks me this, it's not going to be, well, what it is, it's an injection capability inside of the ActiveX exploit engine, and therefore it's going to cause computer systems potentially, he'd be like, what? Shut up. Tell me what it actually means in business terms. Or do we have legal risk? Are our customers at risk? Are our financials at risk? That's the only thing they want to know. But they want nothing really whatsoever to do with what the technological implications are when they ask that first round.
Yeah.
Now later, they might have an overly curious mind when they've got 15 more minutes and go, okay, tell me what the technological stuff is that, because the entire press doesn't tell me what that means. But for the most part, it's just give me the business impact of what I just read.
Yeah, and I think you raised a really good point that to a certain degree, just in our profession, there's a lot of people that shoot themselves in the foot because they're having that type of conversation, with the CEO, CFO, general counsel, et cetera. And part of it becomes, I can have that technology conversation with my CTO, and that's well and good. But when I shift over to my CFO, it's, okay, what does this mean to me from a financial perspective? And if I'm dealing with my general counsel, what does this mean to me from a legal perspective? What does it mean from our shareholders, right? So playing translator and knowing your audience is a really significant part of the job. Any other comments?
Well, I agree 1,000% on those 2 points, because even though I think we've become much more educated at the very senior level in terms of what this is all about, the cyber environment, but you still get asked the question, as an example, what is that DDoS? What are you talking about? Or what is a botnet? What are you talking about? And so there's a very, very significant education that has to go on. And I think that is a big part of our game, is to move this from an IT-oriented environment as CISOs so that it gets into an operational vernacular that people can relate to. And,
Right.
So that's important.
Yeah, and as a member of a garden variety executive team, I shouldn't have to know what a botnet is. Fundamentally, I should be relying on my CSO to say, here's our risk as an organization, and here's what we're doing about it. And if you want the crib notes, let's come and talk later. But you really shouldn't be having that technical conversation.
Bob, I'm encouraged, actually, when the executives are asking those types of questions. 10 years ago, they would have said, oh, the IT guy just solve a problem. The fact that they're asking questions today has changed, and it's changed in a positive way. Today, they're asking, they're still not curious what the solution is, but they want to know what the impact is.
Yeah.
It's certainly going in the right direction. When I look at a company like ours, brand is everything. When we, everything that we do is about brand. It's a quality brand. I think Enron has a brand itself, but Hershey's, it's a brand that people know. And what are we going to do to protect our brand?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy chocolate from Enron.
Or tractors?
No, I wouldn't either. I think they had a few boats. Thanks, Bob. Now I lost my.
I'm here to help.
And I think, if I can jump in on our standpoint, I think I may be the odd man out in that I'm very lucky to be from a company that's technical from the top to the bottom, and I actually don't have too many translation issues when I discuss specific technical threats against our application. So I'm fortunate there, I guess. Although the flip side is I have to, and my team has to really understand the technology involved in the threats to be able to explain them to technology people in the company.
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson, I see the gray cells are functioning in watchful order.
The gears unlocked. Yeah, the message has to be tailored to the audience. And when you're dealing with the help desk, you need to be able to tell them, triage, how to remediate. You're dealing with executives. They want to know, how are we doing? What progress are we making? And you need to have metrics. I think that was the point I wanted to get to. If you don't have the ability to go to your data and give them a fairly reasonable response that's meaningful, they're going to wonder why you have that job.
Yeah, no, and I think that's again another thing that I see is that you can't do the smoke and mirrors thing anymore. Sorry, you can't look under my kimono because that's a secret. And there has to be a good level of transparency and B, an open level of communication, and C, this isn't black magic anymore, right? It's transparency, it's investing in the right level of controls, and really being able to say, based on the investment that I'm making, not just in terms of incident response, but as a security program as a whole, here's what you're getting for your dollar, right?
I think one of the things that it's taken the Department of Defense probably 15 years too much time to realize this, but that it's an information age business.
Better late than never.
And yeah, exactly. And I remember we had a forum about 10 years ago where we brought the top information age companies into the Pentagon. And we said, please tell leadership, what does it mean to be an information age business? And it just hasn't really caught on and just till recently. And I think if you did have a book, and I'm sure there's 1,000 of them out there that's simple enough that you can stick in front of folks from all businesses that aren't really into the information age that much and say, here are the things you have to do or you're going to fail. It takes time. And unfortunately in our business, it's a major incident or spillage that causes the executive leadership to wake up. And as chief, security folks, obviously, that's your job too. You don't want that to happen. But I think it's a very big culture change that has to occur, a transformation.
Yeah. Well, books are kind of like standards. The good news is there's so many to choose from, and you probably have all of them. So this actually dovetails real well into my next question. So we have all this technology that organizations are investing in, anything from cloud computing to Web 2.0 applications to social networking, a la Facebook. We have mobile devices that we're using, and oh, by the way, they happen to have as much power as our computers did a couple of years ago. And at the same time, we have the economic issues that we have right now. And most security organizations, although it's probably not, well, it's definitely not the best organizational reporting, probably report through the CIO organization. The CIO has a general tendency to say, let's deliver more with less. And particularly given the current economic climate, it's like, okay, how much can you cut out of our budget to make sure that we meet our run rate and minimize our financial losses as a whole? So at the same time, we have some nasty actors that are out there. Threats are getting quite a bit more interesting. So how do you deal with that stuff?
So one of the things I've been really studying a lot lately has sort of something to do with the answer to this question, Bob, is energy systems, right? So you've got a battery, it's only got so much, it only does so much, and then eventually it dies. And if you don't recharge it, in effect, you're never going to be able to use it again. The same thing applies with people. They only have so much time, so much energy, and they got to keep going. What I think the security industry is actually now probably beholden to in a negative way is to do things that aren't effective. And we have to do it because there's some sort of rule or some sort of compliance regime or some sort of auditor that says you have to do this. I'll give you an example.
The auditors told us to do it.
Yeah, or you had no choice, right? So I stopped paying attention to IDSs on the internet. My team just ignores them completely. We don't bother finding that we're getting whacked every 15 microseconds by X number of millions of attacks. I just don't care anymore because it just doesn't provide any efficacy and value to me. What did I have to do that? I had to convince my SOX auditors that I didn't have to do this. And this took me 9 months, where I basically said there is no relevance whatsoever to the ethics of my chief financial officer that the IDS engines aren't being watched from the internet. So it was a very interesting dynamic because I was being told to do something I didn't have any efficacy regime on. So what do you do as a result? Well, you get freedom. What do I watch now? I watch the IDS engines that are watching the traffic trying to leave Cisco systems. Guess what happens? You find out computers are infected in Cisco systems and they're trying to attack other computers. So it's more effective. This we've got to continue to do. I don't change the firewalls anymore. My team has gotten out of that business. It's a taskless, frankly, irrelevant exercise. I have to approve the concept, but I don't have to do the math. I don't have to be woken up when the firewalls break, all that kind of other stuff. There are plenty of more opportunities in this space where traditional practice of what we do should be stopped. Or just have somebody else do it, out-task it, get away, because the information analytics systems that we need are the ones we have to spend the time on.
And I mean, that's really a reflection of how businesses have changed in terms of their fundamental functions and their structure, right? Because you think of 30 years ago, we had very clear delineation in terms of how businesses function, both from a people perspective and from a technology perspective. We had the glass house, very controlled environment, and now we've got environments where you have global organizations, you have employees, you have contractors, consultants, you probably have business partners and potentially competitors that are gaining access to your infrastructure. And so back to your point in terms of firewalls are not as relevant as they used to be. You know, where does my border sit, right?
And to sort of build on that theory, it's a question of efficacy, and this is really important to my team right now. They're consistently hearing this from me. I want to know the efficacy of what we do. I don't want to know what we do. I don't want it reported on the frequency that we do it. I want to know the efficacy of what it is that we're doing. Because as soon as something becomes declining efficacy and yet still has to be done, I find some other sucker team in the company to go do it. And that, you know, just basically go, and they get all jacked up about it. They're like, absolutely, I could do that. That's a wonderful thing to do. Terrific, have it.
Yeah.
I will make sure and get out of that business.
Yeah, yeah.
The efficacy? So I'll give you great examples of this in technology. So, not to beat up on the antivirus vendors, but I'll use one as a great one. So I know right
There's some in the
now
Valley?
that my AV and my access list at layer 3 aren't effective because I permit port 80 and I use AV at an 85% success rate of the number of pieces of malware I can detect. I can see 15% that they didn't see before I did. So I know what's effective. As a result, I now know the math that says it's not effective enough because it's going down, not up in most cases, so I have to change the game. Two things we do: heuristic-based software systems on endpoints and putting inline web malware detection systems that are effective because they're finding what I'm looking for as opposed to permitting, allegedly, or stopping that which I was supposed to be keeping out. Those are two examples. In a mathematic way, I can tell you that the threat vector mathematically is succeeding, and therefore what I am doing is clearly failing because it's working. Now, there are other examples of this. We do time. We actually do math on how many hours it takes to do a given task. And in some cases, especially with compliance regimes, those are the ones I really don't want to be involved in, because it turns out all the documentation, which has no efficacy whatsoever other than a reporting regime, because it's not looked at afterwards, is also declining investment. So there are a variety of ways to do it, but net of it is you look at what you spend your time doing, and you think, well, if I'm spending all my time doing this and I'm still losing at a fairly substantive level, then I must be doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. So I could be spending a whole lot of time, if I'm a heavily regulated organization, on compliance, but I may not necessarily be solving the security and information protection problem. Gentlemen?
I would second John's point. It's definitely important, and our organization is still very small in terms of the scale and scope of our operation, to determine those things that are effective and focus on those things that are effective. And I think to a point that we were bringing up as we were prepping this is there are emerging threats, but behind those threats are really people who are attacking you. And from our standpoint, if you identify the people and kind of go after them, see what their motivations are, break the chain, you can keep those threats from being threats to you. And not only looking at methods that are effective, but also looking at tools and using tools as force multipliers so that we can have one person on my team effectively manage dozens of ongoing investigations and threat disruptions is really important to us as part of our tactics for that.
Yeah.
Part of the summary of the keynote this morning is we don't want to be left behind. We don't want to be the no guy. And at the end of the day, we don't get invited to the party being the no guy. New technology comes into our businesses. It helps to drive innovation. What do we know about new technology? It comes with new risks. That's, if nothing else, I think there's a level of job security that comes along with that. Innovation drives global growth. We all want to be in the business of growing our business. When I look at Facebook, tremendous amount of growth they've had over the last few years. And who doesn't want to be in that business? As our business grows, so with our budget, so with all the great things that come along with that. And as strategic leaders, we know in IT that we want to stay in front of technology. As it comes in, as it goes out, we want to make sure our technology is secure. So that's something we just simply have to embrace. We got to be a partner with the business, and that's just partnering with new technology.
Yeah, good stuff. And I think the key thing, the add-on, I think that I would add right here is, so we definitely have to understand and protect the technology environment, but at the end of the day, we also need to help the business understand that security is not just a technology issue, right? You know, we have fundamental business process. We're in business to make money. And there are risks that need to be taken to make money, but you need to take prudent risks and not make the stupid mistakes.
Well, there's nothing like a stupid mistake to really teach everybody not to make stupid mistakes once in a
Yeah,
while. So.
yeah. It always feels really good when you stop banging your head against the wall. John Johnson, were you going to say something?
No.
Just checking.
I would add that I think the biggest thing that I've seen change in the last 2 years, including when you go to the RSA conference and you have some of those discussions, is the fact that the CIOs and the chief security folks like ourselves are really being intermixed with the chief risk managers in the companies. And in some cases, the chief security folks are becoming the chief risk officers, or at least there's a blend of all three personalities making the decision. Because I think we all realize there's not an infinite amount of resources, like John was saying, to go protect these enterprises. And so the only way you're going to do that is to make smart choices and balance the polarity between all those functions. And I think that's the real key to this information age company. I think companies that have a CIO that's too powerful and making decisions for information sharing, but not taking into consideration the risk or the security implications, are also going to be in as much trouble as the security person who is out there just throwing tons of security out there and spending beaucoup bucks with little return on investment. So there's a whole intermix that's changing the culture in this arena.
I was doing some consulting about a dozen years ago, and the CIO we were working for decided that involving users in a decision was optional. And I find it very interesting that there's still many organizations that don't understand that businesses are there to make money, and both technology and security are there to help the business make money and manage risk. And specifically back to your point, the CIO and security should be there as partners as opposed to business prevention units.
So the
Right after. Go ahead.
let me tell you what I disagree with about this morning's keynote. You know, security, we don't want security to be seen as a roadblock. If we have new threats coming at us fast because the business is out there deciding, you know, and I'm totally for well thought out projects to promote productivity and innovation and global growth at the company. We need to be at the table involved with that planning, not brought in afterwards. If we're brought in afterwards, the business can't be surprised that we're reactive. If that's happening, something's not working at your company. And sometimes with new technologies, we do start off reactive, and then we have to pull the right teams together to make decisions and to come up with a strategy. But you know, I don't think it's security's responsibility to go out there and say, these users want to be productive, they want to use Gmail, let's just let them use it. And I don't know that that's what he was saying, but I think that IT has a responsibility to understand the IT management, the business that's going to pay for this, the people who are going to write the checks. If we decide we're going to use Gmail, let's have a project, let's look at it, let's treat it in a formal way, and let's pay the dollars to do it right. Let's not just say, well, our users want to go out and use something free on the internet, so let's just let them use it.
Yeah.
Security, you guys are bad, you're getting in their way, you're harshing their buzz.
Yeah, and quality in manufacturing is actually a really good analogy. So when a car rolls off the assembly line, you don't say, all right, well, let's add some quality now, right? It becomes a fundamental component of the manufacturing process. And in security nirvana, security is part of the fundamental business process. And it's not something that's bolted on afterwards. I think this gentleman had the first question. We'll get to you next. Microphone coming to you.
Test.
Hold the phone.
Thank you. My voice doesn't carry as far as this gentleman here. So my question is exactly what you commented on. The analogy made in the keynote speaker's comments this morning was about veering off the standard path and mashing up the grass as you try and find out the easiest way to get to where you want to go. And I was just wondering, I definitely got your perspective in general, what your thoughts were around allowing the user to actually not only drive the innovation in terms of where they want to go and what they want to do, but how does security potentially stop the stupid mistakes and the other things that potentially could happen if the business drives all these changes forward?
I just get rid of the users.
So there's a couple of things which I'd love to do too, which is use kinetic attacks against people. But that's probably not a great answer to that one, unfortunately. There is this, here's where I think in an information security function, we've done a lot of things kind of backwards. So I'm a parent. I've got kids. My son's 16, my daughter's 10. One of the things I've come to learn that I probably was just as bad at when I was a kid that they're demonstrating to me now that I'm at their parents and they're teaching me is I cannot possibly protect them from themselves when they're convinced that they need to do something. All I can do is remind them that there are consequences and they are accountable for their actions. The security functions in many organizations are somehow labeled as the group that will be held to account for everyone else's stupidity. And that ultimately in the end is wrong. So the idea that we're not in the middle of the process, well, when I started experiencing this with Cisco in 2002, and I was getting these fire drills like, hey, we've got this project going live in 2 weeks that you've never heard of, and we need a rendered opinion on whether or not it's safe. I said, I render no opinion because your emergency is not mine. And there was this allergic reaction because they went, well, we need your opinion because if you say it's okay, then I'm okay. Sorry, not going to do it. You know what the side effect of this is? They started building security teams in their functions that could then render the opinion. So ironically, not since I couldn't fight for endless amounts of budget, I started getting teams showing up in Cisco in functions that were security teams. Now this had a very interesting reaction in my group, which was we have to go dominate that group and take them over because they will therefore render a different opinion than we would.
Well, global domination's good.
But either way, I ended up getting to the exact place I think we ultimately need to be, which is the business that's taking the risk, knows the risk, decides the risks are theirs to take, does it, and then holds themselves to their consequences. It also renders me free to do what I need to do, which is find the really bad stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as you've got the right baseline from a corporate perspective and everybody else is marching down the right path in the line of business perspective. But yeah, right neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, we in the Department of Defense felt that in spades this past fall. When, you've probably read about the stories of banning thumb drives in the Department of Defense, and so we, the Chief Security Team, has been out there preaching the issues associated with thumb drives and stupid things you have to avoid in dealing with thumb drives. And but until you get that accountability, where the local commander or the local supervisor in that operation who's seeing thumb drives misused, or you're picking thumb drives up at bazaars or something like that and just hooking them up to your network, until you get that accountability culture really baked in, you're not going to be really fully successful. And that takes a lot of time in a large enterprise, unless you've got a ruthless dictator who is spending full time, cracking the whip and firing people or hanging people in the middle of the courtyard of the Pentagon or whatever. And obviously that's not realistic.
Yeah. Well, as I say, the beatings will stop when morale improves.
Right.
But what it really just comes down to, I guess, and I'd be curious to know what your companies are like. I need my employee base to not just blindly decide they want to do whatever they want to do and then have somebody else live with the consequences. I mean, this is just, it's an adult. It's like sub-18 behavior. And so my attitude is have them, let them, convince them, let them try this stuff, as long as there's an accountability regime that says there are consequences if something goes wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of like the 16-year-old that gets behind the wheel for the first time and decides after a while that doing 90 miles an hour a few too many times has its consequences.
I think, I mean, at our place, we're still small, relatively small, young, and one of our core values is moving fast, even if that means occasionally making mistakes. So we have a pretty flexible security policy internally in terms of what people can access and how they can access it, and there's a distribution of the security responsibility across the organization already. So there's teams in engineering who have security responsibility for portions of the site, and that does free up my team to really focus on the big threats against all of our users and against the company. But I don't think that would work without the key thing, which is accountability, in that if something bad happens, my team has the ability to go find out what happened, how it happened, when it happened, who's involved, and there are some consequences there. Without that, you really do have to have the dictator creating a policy and running people down.
Yeah. Right after his
What I found is that we generally hire employees and people show up. I'm not sure how that happens, but people by nature want to do the right thing. Part of my job is to educate them to doing the right thing. Where I've seen the tide turn is getting management buy-in, making sure we have a seat at the table, new projects, new technology. And that's probably true with a lot of companies. That's really foundational of how you can change it. And again, people will continue to make mistakes. It's about winning them over one at a time, winning new projects over, but showing the benefit early on and then post go live on a project, showing the security benefits. What I found is helpful, showing the CIO the return on investment, what he got for the budget allocation he gave towards security. But again, it comes down to people making right choices.
Yeah. I think this gentleman's been waiting patiently.
I want to come back to this Gmail thing, which you mentioned before. I'm always, Andreas Wuchner, I'm the CSO of a 100,000 plus employee company. So, and when I hear someone talking, being a CSO, move to Gmail is innovation, then I'm getting a little bit I'm struggling with that. Because if you deploy legacy or replace legacy with legacy from mail to mail, and we talk there about innovation, then I'm always asking myself, if I may be a technology company like Cisco, I have a little bit of different view. But as a business function, I'm saying, okay, this is not innovation for me. You will not sell any tractor more just going on innovation on Gmail. What I'm thinking of if I talk innovation is saying, okay, what can we do more? And if you think about this whole idea of social media, where many of the CSOs around the world have no clue about what the impact is, and where many CSOs are arguing why they are not having a seat on the table. That's for me innovation. That's what I'm asking myself. Why are many CSOs are not on the table, but not Gmail or anything like this?
Well, I'll explain my Gmail reference. We did have a project to look at what are our core IT competencies, and should we be in the business of, we spend a lot of money and effort managing email. So there was a project to look at that. There was also a project to look at Google Apps, to look at are there savings for the desktop. So some of this is savings and productivity, and some of it is innovation. We're looking at voice and video and telecommunication and virtualization, and we're looking at how can we collaborate better on the internet. We're looking at all the things that other companies are looking at. But security, the security folks, I think, tend to be very innovative, creative folks. They don't like to be in the position anyhow that they're just there to be a firewall. We're just here to block you from doing things. And so I think that we're not getting more resources for security necessarily. One of the things that we all discussed is, IT budgets have been down this past year. Security budgets have been pretty much holding, but we haven't seen them really spike up either. And so we don't have more warm bodies to do the work. But we need to let people in the business know that we're aligned with them and that we are eager to, we want to stay in the loop, we want to be involved with their projects, and we just need to keep repeating that. And we're involved. When we hear about things that some division wants to do, we're the ones who say, look, let's put an architecture together. Let's put a plan together. Let's evaluate it. Let's get the right teams together. Let's make this an enterprise standard. If we have Communicator, okay, as our instant messaging, and we don't use other instant messengers. If the business comes up with a use case where they need something that's going to let them be more productive and do voice or video and other things, we'll have a project to look at that. And it's not security that does it, but security is going to be involved. And we're all for that. We don't want to be seen as, if we want to do, and I've heard this, we see security as just being negative, so we find a way to get around this. If we tether our mobile phones to our devices, then I'm clever, Mr. Business Manager, because I'm saving dollars. I don't have to buy a data plan for those phones. Security has to point out, if you're not going over the internet, you're not picking up our exchange policy and our security rules, so then we're not enforcing a PIN and encryption and remote wipe and other things on that device. So there are things that they don't understand, and we just need to say, look, we're all for productivity, but please involve us, because there are things that we're going to catch that you'd rather have us catch up front so we can put together something that benefits the company.
Or, to the advice category, just know this is something I can't protect us from. There's no protection regime.
And
Sorry.
you can choose to accept that risk.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, get them to write it down and sign it. That drives them nuts.
It's our job to provide.
It works great.
We provide expert opinion. We give them the best advice we can, but the business still has to decide, what risk they're going to accept.
Yeah, yeah. So when bad things happen, if you gave your best counsel and you have that signature on the bottom line, say, look, I told you so.
Yeah,
It's your
and
posterior.
that's not even what I want to use that document
No,
for.
I understand
what
that.
I mean?
I'm being facetious, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, it makes them slow down and go, wow, there's no one saving my butt off of this one. This
Yeah.
is my call.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. I just want to continue on the innovation discussion, and kind of would like to get your thoughts on what I at least we're seeing as a growing discipline in the use of security metrics, and how security metrics in general are helping or maybe not helping you, or, in terms of value, pushing forward real solid examples to your executive management and so forth to drive new projects, to show how security is part of an innovative aspect of the business and is growing the business, could act as a leading indicator of the business, if you will, as opposed to maybe what businesses typically see as a more reactive function of security, and really just get your thoughts around that.
Yeah.
So.
Mind if I tee this up? So I would go back to, sure, let me sit down here. So if you look at any other component in an organization, there are typically some really clear metrics in terms of, am I healthy or not? And I would start with the CFO that says, am I making money or am I losing money? And what do my individual business units contribute to that? And that gives me a really good indication in terms of whether I'm healthy. Security, if it's mature enough, needs to have a solid set of metrics that we can agree upon as a profession that says, do I know that my security organization is healthy or not? Am I healthy as a corporation? Am I doing things from a commercially reasonable perspective? And when we get to that point, then I think we're doing our job well. I think there's a lot of variability in organizations, but to your point, I think there needs to be a yardstick that says we understand that we're doing our job well or we're not.
Well, I think that's a good point. To get there, though, we don't have all the knowledge that we need to have. I think having knowledge as a security person is very important. I need to know, what are all the devices out there? I want to know how compliant they are. I want to know I want to be able to, I can't go to somebody at my company and ask for a definitive list of web applications. This is the situation a lot of companies are in. They're working with incomplete information. And so when you have incomplete information, your metrics aren't as good. So you need to work on that. You can't reach a baseline if you don't know where you're going. So get those metrics in place. Get the knowledge out there of what's going on. And then you put together metrics for compliance, for the health, for the efficacy of what it is that you're doing. And when you start to see deviation, when you're not healthy, then there's a problem and you have to go to the doctor.
I think it's a good point that there's a lot of variability in organizations. I think there's a lot of variability in the scope of what security is in organizations too. So trying to define even a single set of metrics, I think, is a very, very hard problem.
Yeah, but I think there are also some things that you can do that say, so do I have the right governance in place? And am I having the right conversation with my business units and my peers? And that for me is the foundation that says, I'm going to have the ability to align security with both business and technology strategy. And then you can start writing the rules of the road that say, based on the culture of my organization, Facebook isn't the same as DoD, so my policies and standards are going to be significantly different. But I'll have my Bible that says, here's how we do things in my organization. But mileage may vary based on who I am.
So, and John just hit on a really key point that I think maybe we can all have in common, though there are fewer, and I agree with you, there's probably not one set of metrics that fits all. But a metric that I bet you can fit all of us is, what data do I need? What data do I have? What data am I missing? And what quality of the data am I dealing with? Because the more that you get to good quality and complete data, the more that security teams and frankly other business operations groups end up benefiting. That's fairly common.
Well, certainly aiming towards the ideal is absolutely a way to get better than we are now. So I totally agree with that.
I'll go with this gentleman.
Yes, I'm wondering how many of you are seeing a threat model that's evolving beyond what is typically an IT-centric issue. In the past, we fought cyber threat types with things like NIPS, NIDS, and WIDS and firewalls. And last several years, we've been moving up to the application layer with penetration testing of applications and web application firewalls. In my company, we're doing pretty good in a lot of those, but we're finding now that we're fighting a lot of fundamentally flawed business processes and in some cases flawed business models that may manifest themselves perfectly well in what the application is doing, but if there is something that's possible to be exploited in the application, it's a business requirement that's flawed. We can't change the application without changing the way the business does business. And I'm wondering, John Johnson, you referred to some of that a little bit ago where you're seeing requirements or silly things the business wants to do. And I'm not just talking about letting people use jump drives or downloading music from their iPod or use social networking sites from the office. I'm talking about broken business processes, broken business models that maybe had good reason to be where they are today, but they probably don't serve the company as well as they did in the past.
I think we do see that as we move to new technology. Some of that shows up as we go from the technology that we had 10 years ago to more of a mobile environment. We start to we need to go back to what are our use cases at the company so that we're able to deliver what the business needs, not what we think the business needs. I'd say the mobile space is a good example, or social networking is a good example of, the businesses, iPhones is an example of, we think we'd be a lot more productive, and they build some ROI out of the air that says if we all had iPhones, we'd be doing this and this, and that would increase our productivity and we make another $1 billion a year, and I don't believe that kind of stuff. So I do see those kind of things too, and those don't tend to pan out if we use a formal process and don't just run off and start adopting things.
I'll give you a flawed business process that's actually directly in Cisco that we ended up having to correct just a little while ago that seemed like a good idea at the time somewhere along the lines that it doesn't apply now. So we've got offshore development centers, and we've got onshore development centers. And it turns out we were buying computers that were standard Cisco issued, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for every single employee in those offshore development centers. That plus licensing equaled about 18 million US a year. And I think that was a good idea at a time level, that was one thing, but at an efficacy of did it provide $18 million back in value that we actually were supplementing the computing infrastructure of other companies, it made no sense whatsoever. So we discovered it as a cost equation. What do? We're saving 16 million this year. What am I doing with the other 2 million? Go figure, I'm spending it on security. Because it was a net savings business model flaw, and yet if we changed it, we could save money, but we could also spend some too. We just spend it differently. And I've got other examples of this too, where, in the kind of more complicated arena where you've got a whole scenario in which you think the business is doing this and they think they're doing this, and then you look at the applications, and in fact that doesn't match whatsoever, because the way the apps are now being worked around is to get the business working the way they are. And this comes down to a question you didn't ask, which is most companies don't know how their infrastructures work now. They know they do because they measure the uptime, but they don't know how. When you start inspecting it, you find those business model flaws, and you also find some IT infrastructure design flaws.
Yeah, I find it amazing that there are some very large companies that have no concept of technology architecture and technology inventory for that matter. And if you build a physical structure without hiring an architect, then the probability of integrity in the structure kind of goes down.
Well, let me give you just a quick example of something that doesn't work at our company. We're trying to teach people, the people who own business applications that there's a security cost that they need to factor in. You mentioned, somebody mentioned web applications, right? And web application security. So we're out there for PCI and for other reasons. We're doing these assessments, and we're finding that whether it's network or web application, we're finding vulnerabilities. And we go to the business and say, go patch this. And they come back and say, look, this is a third-party application. If I patch Apache, then they're not going to support it. So I have to move to the next version where it is supported, and I have to budget for that, and I don't have the budget this year, so I'll do it next year. Plus, I have to test it out before I put it into production. That's going to take a year. And, so the turnaround on some of this is very difficult, and for them, that's a very serious question. But they didn't factor in security, and so I'm finding that it's not just new projects, but existing things as we try to drive towards our baseline, that the business isn't recognizing that. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think even though I believe the ISO stack and all the layers are absolutely essential, and we forget about various layers, the application layer has been the one that's been killing us. One of the biggest mistakes we ever made in the Department of Defense when it comes to the world that I live in was when we made the decision to deploy PKI, just as an example.
Isn't this the year of PKI?
The public key infrastructure that we have, right? And the decision was made that we were going to let the application owners have their way at enabling their apps. And it didn't get centralized under a central management office, let's say under our office. And so as a result, it's taken us 10 to 12 years of painful work, and we're still not there. And the other reality is there's really not a business case that yet has hit the business community to put security into applications. And so what really you're left to is what John was hitting to, and was the fact that you've got to get those business owners within the company to really see the merits of either getting rid of old applications or enabling those applications with security and making sure they interoperate with the overarching architecture. And that's what's missing.
Yeah.
And so as we move forward and we move more into things like Facebook and Web 2.0, that problem gets even worse. And it's a huge challenge that we have.
Yeah. I think this gentleman back here.
Yeah, comment and a question. I think that between Mr. Stewart and Mr. Johnson, you guys had a real good handle on the need for business to take ownership of some of this risk, but I don't think that they can do it without understanding their threats and their vulnerabilities. And I think that's where they understand impact. They tend to fail on threats and vulnerabilities. And the question is, what type of metrics are you guys able to communicate to your business, especially at the leadership level, that translates some of these technical metrics we get from firewall logs and intrusion prevention systems into usable metrics that can explain threats and vulnerabilities to them?
Yeah.
Do you have any metrics that you share with them?
So I'll offer up the ones that we've been using. One is time. How long and how fast can I actually get into an infrastructure system that business relies upon? The second is, how expensive is it for me to do so? And are you increasingly making it more expensive for me? Because that's part of the asymmetrical game you want to play, right? The third is, there's some certain basic hygiene operations, so mathematically how many of your systems are not exploitable is always a good one that you can use that translates fairly easily. And then the fourth one that we oftentimes use with more of the business process teams is, what's your attack surface? So some of this is not exact rocket science yet, but you can create adjacent data that says this plus this plus this independently looked fine, but when I added all four of them together, your attack surface is 100%. I can get you.
Yeah.
And that's the four that we typically use.
So just to add on to that, it's also going to depend who you're reporting the metrics to. So that may be very valuable in terms of a technology and business team, but the board of an organization is probably not going to care about that. What the board's going to care about is, am I spending enough money? Is it reasonable? Do I have the right head count? Am I addressing the right risks? Right? And based on my major business projects that I have, is security engaged in that? Is security fundamentally engaged in the business process? And so the message is, there's probably a standard set of metrics, but depending on your customer, it's going to be a different set of metrics.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. That's basically the approach we take, but we have, we're still struggling with a lack of knowledge. We don't have completeness there. We're not even near enough that I feel comfortable with. I don't feel our numbers are good enough. I'd like to get them better, and then getting we're still in the process of improving our tools. And so in order to have good metrics, you need to be intelligent about what you're measuring. You need to aim it at the right audience. And then you need to have the tools to make the measurements. So you need to know what you're dealing with. You need to make good, be able to make the measurements.
So in terms of emerging threats, and what is it that you guys report, or do you report it? So we're talking about metrics and getting specifically in terms of threats. What is it that you're communicating to your organizations on a regular basis? Because there's the latest threat that's going to come along, and you've got to be able to communicate that in some aspect, right?
Well, I think awareness of this problem has escalated many times over. I know there's one very successful company that we deal with, as an example, dealing with socially engineered attacks. What they've done, which is something that we're looking at maybe trying to do in the DoD, even though we're pretty large, is they have sent out over the past year controlled socially engineered attacks to their senior executives and other managers. And then when they open up that particular email and attachment, they send them a message: you have just been had, and let me tell you what could have happened. And then through that education process, it's had a major impact, according to that particular company, in changing the culture and getting the business units to understand why this is important. Because in the case of the defense industrial base and other manufacturing companies, the biggest problem is not necessarily the headquarters level, from what I hear. It's the manufacturing units, because they're under so much pressure to produce with a certain time frame and schedule and cost that they don't have time to upgrade their software or make these various changes, because that's going to slow up the process. And so you have to educate them on what the impacts are. So, it takes a lot of time. And I do, by the way, I'm very happy these metrics questions are coming up, because I do believe in the past year or two, we're starting to see a big sea change in the use of metrics. I think it is probably one of the most significant things that's really started to change in the CISO world, at least as far as I'm concerned.
The efficacy metric, again, I'm just going to harp on this a little bit, is a classic one, right? So for all the defense electronically that I put up there, I've got a guy right now, and he just did a report on a site down in our Asia Pacific region that said you put all that technology up. You know what you know how I got all that information? Somebody printed it, left it on a printer, and I took it right off the printer. So congratulations, you just spent $1.5 million on something that's totally subvertible through a very simple process. So that efficacy question really comes to mind, which is if there's a subvertible technique and it's cheap, then I've actually spent the money wrong. And if there's a subvertible technique that's expensive, then I'm actually getting on par. But it's a great conversation to have, and don't control it only on electronic conversations.
Human behavior is very often overlooked.
Yeah, and it's the cheapest way to do it.
Yeah.
Bob, I also think that emerging threats really don't happen overnight. So if we understand our baseline assessment in our environment and continue to communicate that up to our executive level, and I know at Hershey our board of directors are interested. What kind of investments are we making? What are our threats? What are our opportunities? You know, understanding that baseline assessment, as new threats come in, we can always measure against that. And you also don't want to discount the fact that you can leverage existing controls. How many salesmen are out there with a silver bullet saying, hey, new threat out there, I've got the solution for you? Are you leveraging your existing investments? And part of that is also aligning yourself with the right types of vendors. There's good ones out there as well. But clearly that ongoing communication, I don't think we can focus on that enough and focus on risk assessment. But if you communicate up, the surprise won't happen.
Yeah. You know what, you bring up a really good point. Actually, that's another metric I think everybody needs to start getting used to, which is there's a 100% chance there's a new technology that's going to surprise me. That's a metric. There's a 100% chance that we're going to get hit. That's another metric. You ought to be consistently reporting. And it's just a matter of the when, not the if. So keep using that as a reminder that there are a couple metrics that are guaranteed, and ironically, that'll help you in the end.
I was given some counsel several years ago that bad things are going to happen, and you're going to have to go in front of the executive team and the board and be able to give them a good response. The big thing is being prepared to go back the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth time and be able to maintain their confidence that says we're doing the right things in terms of preventing bad things from happening. You've been patient. Please go ahead.
Part of my question and observation comes around in a lot of this area, and it's mostly about risk management. And we've talked a bit about security controls, and I've got to the position where in the business I'm telling them security controls are no different to any other control you apply to risk. It's just a particular type of control against information loss or maybe other types of loss. One of the questions comes around to the fact that we now actually make the owner of every single business system, and that includes the process, the people, and the IT, sign a risk document that says what risks they're accepting. And we get them to do the criticality analysis that says, how critical is that to the business? They're now trying to use that back against us on the basis that when we help them write down statements, they then say, well, security's told us the risk is so high, therefore it's security that's stopping me do these things.
Security is stopping me do those things?
Well,
sorry.
It comes around to the fact that we help them identify risk. We'll come up with a big threat to how something operates. That spells out that this particular impact could happen. That doesn't lie in the face of what they want to get out, the opportunity, and they can't do that financial back off. So they immediately turn around and say, well, if I sign in this bottom line here, I'm signing off to say I've accepted this risk, this impact, but I don't want to do that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No. But what's well, it does, apart from the fact that they're now saying because the risk is seen as something that's come from working with the security department, it's the security department's fault that we can't go forward with this. So it's about this governance and education.
Yeah. It sounds like you've created an environment that is pretty reasonable in terms of helping the business understand, here are the risks that are out there, and if this is reasonable, I'm willing to sign on the dotted line.
Well, John had a good point before when he was talking about, efficacy, and he said, how much time are we spending? How much does it cost? These are things the business can understand. And so instead of using nebulous terms like security risk, we have to put it in those kind of terms, I think. And I think we need to leverage other processes that we have, like our BCP, in order to take advantage of that. You're saying this is a very business critical application. We have a low RTO. We've gone through that process, and maybe through the BIA or whatever, we could add some more security. I like your suggestion.
So I'm left with the idea that you could say, fill in the blank that says, before you sign this, I am doing this under duress over the fact that the security team has scared the crap out of me, but I still have to go forward. Eventually you just got to look, especially at an executive level, because most cases, and I would imagine this is becoming an executive team, and look at them and go, you take bigger risks than what you're doing today all the time with the business. You make long-term strategic plans that are based on metric data that you're hoping for futures. You'd make organizational changes, et cetera. This is just another one of them. But you can't have it both ways. You can't just say, the security guys are not letting me do it. But no, the security guys would let me do it, except it scares me. All right, fine. I'll render a blank sheet of paper and say, there's nothing to worry about. Sign here. It's just untenable. They get paid a lot of money to make these decisions, and my attitude would be sign up to make the decision and move on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure if the rest of the room heard it, but there's a lot of organizations that don't take a consistent enterprise approach to looking at risk, and technology risk being one of those. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, don't tell us the truth. We can't handle the truth.
Yeah. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This gentleman.
You talked a lot about accountability and spreading that accountability across the organization. We recently did a survey and found that we have about 900 different vendors that our data goes to. Could you talk a little bit about how you've managed to control data loss when your data is leaving the organization, and maybe strategic approach at a corporate level to addressing that?
Actually, I guess I'll take that. Because we have a problem specific to that in the platform on Facebook, where third-party people are allowed to write applications, and with the permission of a user installing the application, can access some subset of their data for the purpose of whatever their application does. And we thought a lot about, before launching platform, we thought a lot about how would we maintain control of the data realistically, pragmatically, not only legally in terms of the terms of service, saying that they can't hold the data and they can only use it in specific ways and things like that, but realistically, if someone decided to ignore the terms of service, how would we identify it? How would we be able to track that data down? Could we see if it went other places? And we went through methods that I'm not going to go into because we're still using them, to identify data leaks and identify people who were violating terms of service, and then we would use the terms of service and go after them. I think the key point is, if you're going to move data around, you should have some sort of way to keep track of it. And it may be something as simple as throwing in an email address that if it ever gets email, that data set that the email was in was compromised, or other methods like that. And then you have to have a legal and policy foundation to be able to go after the people who you're sharing the data with and make them accountable. And in our experience, what happened was there were a few bad apples around the launch of platform. We went after them aggressively, as we generally do, and word got around very quickly, and we saw a dramatic increase in compliance afterwards.
That gentleman.
So my question is more for the CSO of a web company, probably directly to the Facebook guy. How do you eliminate web application risks? So like third-party libraries or open source software, you can't possibly audit 100% of that source code. Your developers are pressured to move fast, and it's effective for them to adopt it. Not to mention malicious insider developers. How do you know you don't have those vulnerabilities now?
I think that that's a problem that every company faces, really, is you use a large stack. There's a lot of pieces in the stack. You didn't write every piece. You can't audit every piece. So every company has that issue. It's really a matter of degree. And the way that we deal about it is we refactor a lot, we test a lot, we have a lot of eyes on the code. Where we use open source, we keep track of the communities around supporting that open source. In some cases, we're the main supporter of the open source, so we incorporate changes very rapidly if we get security fixes or other issues. I think that goes back to the idea that there's some assumed risk if you're using software that you didn't write yourself. And you have to assume that risk in order to run the business. For malicious insiders and things like that, the way that our engineering team works, it's actually relatively hard for any individual to put things in the code that aren't seen by everyone else. And definitely these are things that would show out during testing.
You're also trying to use safeguards in production to monitor and detect whether or not the most obvious backdoors have been put in place?
We have a lot of configuration management to do things like that, to identify exactly what's on the box, see where there's anomalies in boxes. And that's partially driven from a security standpoint, but it's more largely driven from the fact that we just have tens of thousands of servers and we want to make sure that they're all a consistent platform. So where there's instances that things pop out, they actually pop out pretty quickly. And the fact that we occasionally find something is a good validation for the tool set for me. Usually what it is there's a box that somehow or another missed a push and it pops out and then we have to go back and manually do it. But the consistency across the whole platform, configuration management software and the auditing of that stuff is one way that we'd attack that problem.
We have time for one more question. I know there's several people waiting, but we've got our last person right here.
Yeah, so John Johnson, you mentioned that you guys are looking at Google Apps. I'm interested in how that process is. Are you guys going to consider it? If not, why not? And I'd like to do just a quick poll of the others. Have you looked at Google Apps? Would you consider it? And if not, why not?
I guess I don't want to be, I don't want to speak out of school and make a comment officially of my company's view of another company.
Oh, go for it.
I think that in general, the consensus in industry with large corporations, based on my talking to other security managers, is that there is a concern, and there are other talks here this week that talk about this too. There is a concern about where is our data. Can we pinpoint it? Can we audit it? Can we recall it? What if we erase it? Is it still stored someplace? Those are good questions. What do we do if we have a forensics case? So from a security standpoint, I think there are legitimate concerns about cloud services in general. I think, as far as do Google Apps or something similar, does it provide an enterprise class service that replaces everything that we've been putting in place for the past 15 years? I don't think it is quite there yet, and that's my personal comment.
Our position is we don't have a defined project, but I think as the conversations continue around the hall around Google Apps, how could we not consider it when we talk about innovation, efficiency, and cost? It has to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and let me just add that there are cloud services that we are seriously considering and that we'll probably use. I don't think that I want to get into specifics about that, but that was just one project that I know security was involved with, and we do try to get involved with those things.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, it's is there business value in going to Google Apps or whatever particular cloud application I'm using, and if there's good business justification, it's probably something I could consider. But understanding what the risks are in terms of going to Google Apps versus Microsoft or pick your favorite suite of office automation applications, But the logical question needs to be asked. So I'm using this right now. Here's the cloud application. What's the delta, right? What's the business value? What are the risks? And if I'm thinking through that logically, then I should be able to come up with a reasonable conclusion and put the right compensating controls in place. Is that a fair statement?
I think we have at Facebook a great platform for sharing information called Facebook. We run a lot of our company on Facebook.
Is that one of those social networking applications?
That being said, though, there's a lot of applications out there. There's a lot of other things that provide functionality that maybe we haven't gotten to building yet or aren't going to build. So we look at a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and for us in the DoD, yes, we're looking at all those different applications. We have a number of pilots that we have underway and planned to look at those. But as all the panelists have said, I think there's a number of security requirements that have to be addressed, and that's why the pilots are so important.
We look at everything. I mean, the real thing to look at is always what are the user community interested in getting from any service that is either A, better than what the central IT function has created, B, is unique and in fact adds something that the central IT function never thought of, and or C, is more cost efficient than the central IT function can deliver. And that could be Google Apps, that could be WebEx's platform, that could be Facebook, but either way, that's the way to ask that question, because the idea that the IT organization didn't deliver something that ultimately the user wants is probably why it's being used. Yeah. So you should figure out the why first.
So I'm getting the hook right here, and first of all, I want to thank you for all your good questions. Thank you, panel, for your participation. I think it's lunchtime, and let's go eat.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob.